When Frodo boarded the White Ship and left Middle-earth forever, fans have wondered for decades. Did he become immortal among the Elves in the Undying Lands? Or was his fate something far more bittersweet? This isn't just academic curiosity. The answer reveals one of Tolkien's most profound truths about mortality, sacrifice, and what it truly means to find peace. What happened to Frodo in the West touches on the deepest themes of The Lord of the Rings, themes that most readers never fully grasp. Today, we settle this question once and for all. We will examine Tolkien's own words. We will dive into the metaphysics of Arda, and we will uncover why the ring-bearer's ultimate fate is both more tragic and more beautiful than most people realize. The Grey Havens, the final scene of The Lord of the Rings, a moment of profound departure. Frodo stands beside Bilbo, Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond. He prepares to sail into the uttermost west, to Aman, the Undying Lands, the realm of the Valar themselves. This was not a vacation. It was not even a reward in the traditional sense. This was a medical evacuation. Frodo's passage was what Tolkien called a special grace, an unprecedented exception to the fundamental laws of Middle-earth. Since the downfall of Numenor, the straight road to the west had been closed to mortals. Any attempt to reach Aman uninvited would see a ship curved back to Middle-earth's eastern shores, or worse, lost into the void. But Frodo was not just any mortal. He was a ring-bearer. He had carried a burden no living creature should bear. His passage was arranged by the Valar themselves, a recognition that his service had earned him something beyond normal mortality. Not immortality, but the chance for healing that Middle-earth could no longer provide. The ship itself was significant. It was one of the last White Ships, a vessel built specifically for the journey to Aman, capable of finding the straight road that existed outside normal geography. When that ship sailed, it carried its passengers on a one-way journey to a realm that existed partially outside of time itself. But understanding where Frodo went is only the beginning. To understand his ultimate fate, we need to examine why he had to go at all. Frodo carried 3 wounds that would never fully heal in Middle-earth. Each one marked him permanently, changing him from the simple hobbit who left Bag End into something else entirely, something that could no longer find peace in the world he had saved. The first wound came from the Witch King's Morgul blade on Weathertop. This was not just physical damage, it was spiritual corruption. It left him partially existing in the Wraith world. Even after Elrond's healing, Frodo retained a sensitivity to the Shadow Realm. It would plague him for the rest of his life. On the anniversary of that stabbing, he would grow pale and cold, reliving the moment when darkness nearly claimed him. The second wound was Shelob's sting. The giant spider's venom did not just poison his body. It left him with a terror of darkness and enclosed spaces, a terror he could never entirely overcome. The physical pain faded, but the psychological trauma remained, a constant reminder of helplessness and near death. But it was the third wound that cut deepest, the psychic damage from bearing the One Ring for 17 years, feeling its weight, resisting its corruption, experiencing the constant pressure of Sauron's will. This had fundamentally altered Frodo's relationship with existence itself. He had looked into the abyss of absolute power and absolute corruption. He had felt the ring's promise of control over life and death. After experiences like that, how do you go back to worrying about garden parties and seed catalogs? As Tolkien wrote, Frodo saved the Shire, but not for himself. This was not just poetic language. It was literal truth. The Hobbit who returned from Mount Doom was not the same Hobbit who had left. He had been changed on a fundamental level, carrying scars that ran deeper than flesh, deeper than memory, deeper than anything earthly healing could reach. The tragedy was that his wounds were invisible to those around him. Sam could see that his master was troubled, but he could not comprehend the magnitude of what Frodo had endured. The other hobbits saw a returning hero, not a broken soul carrying spiritual shrapnel in his heart. This is why he had to go west, not as a reward, but as the only remaining option for someone who had sacrificed everything, including his ability to enjoy the peace he had won for others. Now we come to the heart of the matter. Did crossing to the Undying Lands grant Frodo immortality? The answer, according to Tolkien's own explicit statements, is definitively no. In letter 246, Tolkien addressed this question directly. He wrote, "Frodo was meant to pass over sea with the Elves to the Undying Lands. But an exception was made for the ring-bearers. They could not be healed from their damage in time, and therefore were granted the grace to pass over sea." Notice the language, "could not be healed in time." This implies that healing was possible, but it required more time than a mortal lifespan could provide. The Undying Lands do not grant immortality to mortals. That would violate the fundamental gift that Eru Ilúvatar gave to men. Mortality is not a curse in Tolkien's cosmology. It is the defining characteristic that allows men to transcend the bounds of Arda itself. To remove mortality would be to rob men of their essential nature and their ultimate destiny. What the Undying Lands do provide is preservation and healing, but only for those who are naturally immortal. Elves do not age in Aman because they were created to be bound to Arda until its ending. The Valar exist beyond time because they are divine beings. But mortals remain mortal, regardless of geography. This creates a beautiful paradox in Frodo's situation. He was granted passage to a land where time moves differently, where healing happens on a scale impossible in Middle-earth, where the music of creation still echoes in the daily life of its inhabitants. But he remained fundamentally mortal, experiencing this divine realm through mortal senses, mortal understanding, mortal time. Think of it this way. Frodo was not transformed into something else. He was given the opportunity to heal as himself, to experience peace as a hobbit, to remember joy as the being he was created to be. The Undying Lands did not change his nature. They revealed it, freed from the damage that had obscured it. The geography of Frodo's destination matters. It helps us understand the nature of his stay in the West. Some scholars debate whether Frodo lived on Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle that sits just outside Valinor proper, or whether he was permitted to enter Aman itself. This is not just academic nitpicking. It reflects different theories about how close to divinity mortals can approach without losing their essential nature. Tol Eressëa was traditionally the dwelling place of the Eldar who had returned from Middle-earth, particularly the Noldor, who bore the weight of their rebellion against the Valar. It was close enough to Valinor to receive its benefits: the cessation of aging, the healing of spiritual wounds, the presence of beauty beyond earthly comprehension. But it was separate enough to maintain some connection to the mortal world. If Frodo dwelt on Tol Eressëa, it would make sense as a kind of spiritual hospital, a place where his wounds could heal without completely severing him from his mortal nature. He could experience the peace of the Undying Lands while remaining fundamentally a hobbit. But Tolkien's letters suggest something more profound. He describes Frodo's journey as entering the true West, implying not just proximity to Valinor, but some level of access to the realm of the Valar themselves. This would make his experience even more extraordinary. A mortal walking in lands where the creative forces of the universe still dwelt in visible form. Either way, the crucial point remains. Frodo's stay was always intended to be temporary. Tolkien explicitly referred to it as a sojourn, a word that implies temporary residence rather than permanent relocation. He was not immigrating to immortality, he was convalescing in paradise. The healing Frodo experienced in the West was not just physical or even psychological. It was spiritual restoration on a cosmic scale. His wounds were inflicted by forces of absolute evil. The Witch King's blade carried the corruption of Sauron himself. Shelob's venom was the poison of primordial darkness. The ring's burden was the weight of dominion over all life. Only in a realm where the creative power of Ilúvatar still operated directly could such wounds be truly healed. So here is the truth that many fans find difficult to accept. Frodo did not become immortal in the Undying Lands. He remained mortal. He lived out his remaining years in peace and healing. And then he died, as all mortals must. But this is not a tragedy. It is the completion of the most profound gift in Tolkien's mythology. Frodo's mortality was not a limitation to be overcome. It was the very thing that made his sacrifice meaningful. When he carried the ring to Mount Doom, he did so knowing he was risking everything: his life, his sanity, his soul, for a cause greater than himself. Immortal beings like Elrond or Galadriel could afford to take such risks because they would endure regardless. Frodo's choice carried the weight of genuine mortality. The years he spent in the Undying Lands were not preparation for immortality. They were preparing for the ultimate mortal experience, a death free from pain, fear, and regret. In Armen, surrounded by beauty beyond description, his spirit was restored to what it had been before the shadow touched it. His mind was healed of trauma. His body was freed from poison. His soul cleansed of the ring's corruption. When death finally came to Frodo in the West, it would have been death, as Ilúvatar intended it for mortals. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a limitation, but a liberation. Not a failure of the body, but a graduation of the spirit. Tolkien revealed this truth in letter 325. He wrote, "Frodo was meant to pass over sea, but as a special grace. But they would eventually die of free will and leave the world." The phrase of free will is crucial. Frodo's death would not be the result of disease, violence, or decay. It would be a conscious choice, a choice to release his hold on existence and pass beyond the circles of the world. This is the gift of men at its most profound, the ability to transcend even paradise itself, to go beyond the reach of the Valar, beyond the bounds of creation, into whatever lies beyond. Elves are bound to ardor until its ending. The Valar themselves cannot leave the world. They were sent to guard. But mortals, even in the Undying Lands, retain the ultimate freedom, the freedom to let go. Understanding Frodo's fate reveals something fundamental about Tolkien's entire mythology: the relationship between suffering, healing, and transcendence. Frodo's journey to the Undying Lands was not just about personal healing. It was about completing a cosmic cycle. The ring-bearer had to be restored not just for his own sake, but because his sacrifice had helped heal a wound in creation itself. The destruction of the ring did not just defeat Sauron. It ended an entire age of corruption. and it began the process of Middle-earth's restoration. By going west, Frodo became part of that restoration. His healing in Aman was not separate from Middle-earth's healing. It was an integral part of it, the same divine grace that allowed the Shire to bloom again, that brought peace to Gondor and Rohan, that enabled the Fourth Age to begin in hope rather than despair. That same grace also worked to restore the Hobbit who had made it all possible. But the most profound truth is this: Frodo's mortality was not overcome in the Undying Lands. It was fulfilled. He experienced mortality as it was meant to be, not as decline and decay, but as completion and transcendence. His death, when it came, would be the ultimate expression of the gift of men, the ability to go beyond, even paradise, into whatever lies beyond the reach of angelic sight. In this light, Frodo's fate becomes not just happy, but sacred. He did not need immortality because he had something better, the promise that his story would end in perfect peace, and that ending would be not limitation, but liberation. Frodo was not granted eternal life. He was granted something rarer: rest. His story ends not with immortality, but with healing, closure, and the quiet peace he could never find in the Shire. For 17 years, he had carried a burden that crushed his spirit. For the remainder of his life, he experienced restoration that lifted that weight entirely. The Undying Lands gave Frodo what he truly needed: time to remember who he was before the shadow touched him, space to heal wounds that ran deeper than flesh, and ultimately the peace to face his mortality without fear or regret. When we imagine Frodo in the West, we should not picture him desperately clinging to life or yearning for immortality. We should see him as he was meant to be: a hobbit at peace, surrounded by beauty, free from pain, ready when the time came to embrace the gift that is uniquely mortal, the ability to let go and pass beyond even paradise itself. That is not a consolation prize. That is the completion of the greatest story ever told about what it means to be mortal in a world where immortal beings exist. Frodo's mortality was not his weakness. It was his strength, his gift, and ultimately his triumph. For the ring-bearer, that was enough. For the reader who understands what Tolkien was truly saying about sacrifice and transcendence, it is everything. What do you think? Does this understanding of Frodo's fate make his sacrifice more meaningful or more tragic? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe for more deep dives into the profound truths hidden within Middle-earth's greatest stories.